Good morning, wonderful colleagues, and I hope you're all enjoying breakfast this morning. I've just made my wife and son bacon bagels, and I'm on what feels like coffee number 15 of the day so far. So, hope everyone's well, and welcome to today's CPD breakfast on Friday, April the 3rd, 2020. So, what I wanted to talk about with people today was around the ideas of the spaces that we now have for teaching and learning and how these have changed, the times for teaching and learning that are available to us, and again, how that's changed, and how we start to think about managing the transitions that are going on at the moment, and understanding that we're really in a phased process with everything that's going on in the world around us, and how we consider that and how we work around it. So, thinking about our teaching and learning and planning and working environment. So, on the left is a fairly traditional classroom setup, slightly innovative, I suppose, with sort of wings pointing towards the teacher in that style. But this is what both teachers and pupils are used to and have been used to for, a long period of time, probably around several hundred years. This is effectively what conventional education has looked like. And though the nature of, the board might change, effectively, the teaching model in this country has been you have a room with some desks and some chairs. You have an authoritative adult, and you have the technology of the time displaying information, whether or not that's a chalkboard and piece of chalk or a smart board. That's effectively how the setups work. So this is what we're all used to, and obviously, therefore, there's a danger that the work we're currently doing is about trying to shoehorn this environment into this environment, which is the home. And this is the balance here, isn't it? So this is a floor plan of a 3-bedroom house available on Rightmove in Haverhill. And I'm not trying to say something which is representative, but if you just think about a 3-bedroom family home, say with 1 or 2 children or more in the area, just think about how quickly these spaces close off. And the thing to think about is these spaces are applicable for both pupils and teachers in terms of how they deal with things. Because on the left-hand side, the classroom, well, not only is that the traditional space of planning that teachers need to think about, how do I plan for my classroom, how do I set up my classroom, but it often tends to be where teachers will do a lot of their work, and therefore the work they're doing here is always implicitly thinking about the work that will happen in the classroom area. What this now changes to is how do we think about where both we and the pupils work. If we're working parents, for example, where is an appropriate space, and how can that be sort of cut off to enable you to get on with work and do the things you want to do. If you're a child, again, where do you work? Where do you set things up appropriately? It might be in your bedroom, it might be at a kitchen table, it might be in the lounge. And again, so the nature of these spaces has changed in terms of the time we spend at them. What's happened is, yes, of course, we've always worked in our homes before, but I don't think really we can say we're working from home, because that implies to me always a sense of freedom and kind of liberation from the workplace. We are working at home in a lockdown, as are our pupils, and that's a very, very different scenario indeed. So thinking about how we need to move this space into this space, as you can see, is difficult, because they literally don't fit. If there's room in your house to set up 30 seats facing a whiteboard, that's impressive. And obviously, that's my dream, to eventually have my own classroom space at home to practice. But that's not the reality, is it? So we need to think, okay, our pupils and our parents and ourselves and our own children are now working in these spaces, and these are now their default working areas. So whereas this has been the default provision for the last several hundred years, for the foreseeable future, this is now the working provision. So we need to think really deeply about how we can transfer learning and teaching from one space to the other, because, as you can see, the left-hand side does not fit into the right-hand side. And I think in terms of our abstract and conceptual thinking about teaching and learning, we also need to consider that and not just try to overlay one into the other by the use of digital technology. So again, think about the familiarity of the day on the left. So um, this September, we started with a much more elegant school day, abandoning split breaks, creating a clearer process, 1 hour lessons for pupils, very clearly designated break time and lunch, more time for the pupils, more time for staff. And that's worked really well in terms of, the positive impact on the school. It's a really, really clearly delineated day, and that's very helpful in terms of the pupils' organisation, their movement around the school and just what they're used to. It gives them really clear, simple regularity. That's now gone. And I think, again, how do we manage this time with our children? How do we create routines for them that shouldn't aim to replicate this, because they're not at school in the same way that I can't replicate the nursery experience for my son at the moment because he's not at nursery. The two don't correlate. We need to try and do something different. Now, on the right-hand side is a lovely example of a daily timetable that Tara's created for Year 7 pupils, which, again, gives them this structure and gives them a bit more shape and structure, which I think is really helpful about the kind of work they should be doing. I like the recommendation to see Tujan's fitness video, and then again some range of the subjects and the options, an hour for lunch, and then this idea of creative time or going for a walk or a bike ride. This sort of physical thing, I think this is a really good timetable and a really helpful thing to think about. And again, those of us who are parents with school-age children, how are we trying to manage this? Probably a few hours of schoolwork in the morning and then more fun, creative things in the afternoon. Is this going to be a sustainable model outside of school? Again, how can we think about it? How else can we think about trying to develop things in terms of what we're doing? Some young people will thrive on a structure like this. Others will find it more difficult, as we know from the left-hand side as well. Some pupils absolutely need the rigor of 1 hour period spaced across a day. Others couldn't handle it. But the other thing to remember is the working day can also look like this. Here is Marlo in our workspace doing what he described as important work on the Puta. This involved trying to find episodes of Hey Dougie on BBC iPlayer, which he was worryingly successful at doing. The day is interrupted much more. There is less space and time for yourselves. There is the consideration of the other members of your household. How do we balance not only childcare but self-care? How do we balance that if we're team leaders, the professional care that we need to apply to the teams and the people we work with, and again that professional self-care? How do we balance all of these things together? And therefore, in terms of our timings, we need to think flexibly and openly about how we work and what that looks like. One of the advantages of technology is it allows this kind of fluidity and this kind of plasticity, I suppose, in terms of our communications. One of our disadvantages with it is it means we can end up emailing each other at sort of 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night and really thinking that that's a good idea. If there's one routine we should all aim to absolutely keep for ourselves and our families, it's that of sleeping well, because I think just that is a really important, element of self-care. Sleeping more is really, really essential, because when the day does look like this, and there will be days where you will not get much, if anything, done because of your children, we also then need to think, okay, that's similarly true to our parents in our school community and their children. For a variety of reasons, there may be days where things simply don't happen. So we need to start thinking about the transition process here and what these different structures look like. So I think it's important to think about this transition as a series of phases. And we're currently, I think, in the first phase of teaching and learning in this new style. There's still an awful lot we don't know about COVID-19. It's still a situation of enormous anxiety for people. By now, members of our community may have had it, or will know people who've had it, or even suffered bereavements from it, and it's a very upsetting and unsettling period. And during this first period, I think our main objective has been to provide work and a sense of normality to pupils through the digital familiar forums. It's important to remember that these digital forums have been designed, though, to be complementary to the classroom experience, not to replace it entirely. And in later CPD sessions, I'll be talking through how you can use some really excellent things in Teams to create a sort of virtual classroom. But we must always remember these things were designed to complement, not replace. So we need to think how about those things happening. The pictures here, on the right, we have some wonderful geography work, which Kerry submitted to me. And on the left, we have some wonderful drama stuff that Josie sent in. And what I like about both of these is that there's still a place for very traditional exercise book learning in this environment. Pupils still have desks, they still have pens, they still have books. This isn't something that needs to be abandoned as we look for a new fluid model in the remote teaching and learning period. On the left-hand side, though, is a lovely example of a pupil who's taken their drama script that they'd written in their exercise book and then off their own back has decided to use the Lego that they have at home, so the resources that they have at home and that they wouldn't have at school, to turn it in to the scene in front of you, which again I think shows great imagination, but it's also starting to think that sense of, okay, we can use home in a different way, and we do have different learning resources, and as teachers we can start to think about what resources do people have at home that could start to produce different kinds of learning and more developed or interesting forms of learning. I think it's important to accept that you and pupils will not be as productive as you would normally be within the usual frameworks for learning, because we don't have the complementary nature of classroom sessions, of daily interactions with pupils, of being able to pursue work with someone, of being able to have a conversation about work at tutor time, of just being able to find a pupil at lunch and just have a word with them about how something's going. Similarly, we don't have that within our own organisation anymore. That sort of day-to-day really healthy coaching and mentoring process of just checking in on each other and seeing how work's going and what could be done, again, doesn't exist. So we need to think about new frameworks. And during this process, we're all going to make mistakes, and I think it's really important to accept that, but think about those mistakes and use them in a positive fashion. There will be work that you set that is very, very difficult for pupils to do. There will be work that you set that will be too easy. There'll be work that they'll ignore because they don't find it useful. Look at these things with a reflective and critical eye, not self-deprecating, and just think realistically, right, what can I do as a result of that? Can it improve the situation? I do think it's also important, though, to believe that we can all be more productive within the new environment, that we don't just have to accept that we can't move the classroom online. We can't do that. We know we can't do that. And when we accept that, I think that's quite liberating. And we think, okay, what can we do within the new environment to produce the kind of beautiful work that we see in these pictures and some of the wonderful work that I've seen sent to me by many teachers and pupils so far during this extraordinary period. And I think fundamentally, the key for people is going to be collaboration, how well we work together and how well we work together with the pupils. This is not the time for trying to establish incredibly strict hierarchies across departments or line management. It's a time for sharing ideas. Similarly with our pupils, it's not the time to be attempting to discipline and sanction when things aren't being done. It's time to think, okay, what do I want them to get out of this? What do I want them to learn? And increasingly we have an opportunity for them to think as a family, what do we want to learn from this? How do we want to develop something? And therefore that sense of collaboration within our own families to support us to do the work that we need to do, within our own departments to support us and engage in that, and finally, across the families that we work with as teachers, there's a remarkable opportunity here. And at the moment, I certainly don't know what the future will look like, but actually I think we can be optimistic. I think we can be positive about it. But to come back to this again, we will manage this effectively by collaborating with each other, by working with each other and supporting each other. And the thing I'd like you to take away from this morning's CPD breakfast is that point that we're in a transition. It's going to continue being a transition, and collaboration is really key to this principle. Have a lovely day, everyone, and have a wonderful Easter holiday. Have a proper break, and I'll see you on the first Monday back for some takeaway teaching. Take care, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.